a computer-programmed reality. We are living in a computer-programmed reality, and the only clue we have to it is when some variable is changed and some alteration in our reality occurs. We would have the overwhelming impression that we were reliving the present, déjà vu, perhaps in precisely the same way, hearing the same words, saying the same words. I submit that these impressions are valid and significant, and I will even say this: such an impression is a clue that at some past time point a variable was changed, reprogrammed as it were, and that because of this an alternative world branched off.
Well, all right. It's Robert Phoenix. Hey, what's happening out there, everybody? Just checking in with you on Friday for a little Friday FARcast. Feels good to be back in the pilot seat on Fridays. So next week, I'm thinking probably next week we're going to go back to 15 Minutes of Flame. It's pretty much teed up and ready to go. And that'll be on the video side, streaming at you. Monday through Friday. Friday, of course, being the Friday FARcast. Be with extended rants, insights, and conversations with others. How are you? What's happening out there? In probably what is going to go down as one of the hottest summers in recent history. Seems like every single day here in South Central Texas, we're in triple digits or very close to the triple digits. 98, 99 degrees, 100 degrees. But there's something about the heat that's different, qualitatively different. And I'm going to use two recent examples of what I'm talking about with the qualitative difference in today's heat. One of the things that has been showing up more recently are athletes who have been taking part in late summer programs, specifically football, who have had some very serious repercussions around training in the heat. Most recently, there was a young man by the name of McNair, last name McNair, who was a football player, a freshman at the University of Maryland, and he died, passed away very quickly due to heat stroke, heat exhaustion, and this culture in football that is very much like basic training in the Army, where they try to break you down and push you, get you beyond your limits. And some of that is actually really important. Like there are times where we have to go beyond what we think we're capable of. However, that said, there are times when if somebody is in charge or managing that experience, that they've got to be more aware and in tune with what happens and how people can actually really suffer some tragedy. Now, the other case that I'm going to bring up happened, I believe, either yesterday or 2 days ago. 13-year-old boy in North Texas who was training with the freshman football team. He died. It's a 13-year-old boy. Track athlete, looked like a good kid. So what's going on here? There have been periods where clearly there have been 90-plus degree temperatures during training camps in states all across the country. I remember as a kid growing up playing high school football and doing two-a-days. And I lived in San Jose, California, and during the summertime it could be really hot there. Not Texas hot, mind you. A hot day for us would be in the high 80s, low 90s. 10 degrees can make a significant amount of difference. But I'm talking about something different here. There's something about the heat. It's a different kind of heat. It's a different kind of 98 or 99 or 100 degrees. Because in a lot of ways, we've had examples of teams and individuals, soldiering through that heat. Now, of course, every now and then we'll run into somebody like a Corey Stringer who will pass away due to heat stroke, and it does happen. But there's something about the heat that we are experiencing that is different. And I can't quite put my finger on it. It's not the same. It's 98 that feels like 108. And I don't know whether it's the heat that's coming up from inside of the earth, combining with heat that's being trapped in the ion. I don't know what's going on. Maybe it's has to do with a higher degree of cosmic radiation that's hit. I don't know what it is, but it feels different. And certainly we have at least two casualties. I think there's probably more. If I wanted to get real granular about it. So I just wanted to bring that up, and something worth paying attention to, especially as we head towards what some people believe is a solar minimum. And apparently one of the examples of headed towards a solar minimum is increased temperature. And the solar minimum has to do with a cooling of the planet to such a degree that it resembles what took place in Europe during the Dark Ages. And the Dark Ages were dark for a reason. It was cold. Things didn't grow. And that is one of the spike cycles on the solar minimum continuum. So are we headed for a much cooler time? Is this really a prelude to the solar minimum? Or is this more fodder for the global change, global warming advocates? We'll see. We'll see. We know things are hotting up for one Donald John Trump. Wow. I'm telling you, it is the gauntlet time. Mars going through his sixth house of open enemies. He's got a new one now. It's called Michael. His name is Michael Cohen. Michael Cohen has flipped. Of course, he's had to flip. Why did he have to flip? Because the FBI went in and raided Michael Cohen's office illegally. There was no warrant. They went in and they took everything. Well, I suppose post 9/11, everything and anything is possible in the name of national security. So they had stuff on Michael Cohen. They had stuff on him. Now, Michael, here's what you could do. You can sort of turn state's evidence here. You can flip your script and come to the other side. And we'll make it easy for you. We'll make sure that you get out of this unscathed. See what's happening with Paul Manafort out there? You don't want that. You don't want what's happening to you. Right? What's happening with Paul Manafort to you? No. That's a living. We'll make your life a living hell. Yeah, I know that you can represent yourself. But think of all the money you'd be wasting by not representing other clients. By the way, what kind of legal career does Michael Cohen have after this? I'll tell you what kind of career he has. He'll be a spokesperson on CNN. That's what will happen. Now we'd like to bring on Michael Cohen, who has some insights into the legal nature of what's happening inside the Trump White House. Michael, it's always a pleasure to have you here. Pleasure to be here. You know that's coming. You know that's where, there is that little carrot stick for him. Come on over. We got great air conditioning at CNN. You're on the hot seat now, but over here it's so cool. So cool. So what is he doing? He's basically admitting that he made a payment to Stormy Daniels because Trump was stupping. He was stupping Stormy. He was a stormtrooper. He stormed the gates that many an infantry had already previously stormed before him. Is it illegal for Donald John Trump to pay off Stormy Daniels? The answer is no, it's not. It's not illegal. He can do it. He can say, here you go, here's $100,000, keep your mouth shut. Oh, by the way, sign an NDA. Is that illegal? No, that's not illegal. Is it an impeachable offense? I would say the answer is no. Does it represent a type of morality that somehow, we venerate and place an extremely high value on? Then, our presidents, they must be paragons of virtue and morality. How many times have I talked about this? How many times have I talked about presidents and their predilections? They're there because they have predilections. They're flawed humans. That's why they're there. That's how they get there. There's nobody walking on water that's in the 202. Trust me. Ain't happening. Do you want me to go back and cite chapter and verse? Be happy to. What was going on with Obama? Oh. Well, clearly, there were some irregularities that happened with Obama and his sex life prior to becoming president of the United States. Perhaps there are even some irregularities around his partner. I think we all know what I'm talking about. Just ask Joan Rivers. Oh, you can't. She's dead. There are people who think that Joan Rivers is still alive. I wonder if these people are all still alive. They're just off partying somewhere. They must be having an amazing grand old time. There's Bowie, Prince, Joan Rivers, Michael Jackson, JFK Jr. Are they all just hanging out at the same place? Maybe Tupac is there. Maybe Biggie's there. Nobody. Does anybody really die? Question mark. But if you want to get into Obama's closet, you got to get into pre-presidency, unless you count Reggie Love, who was known as Obama's body man. Reggie Love, the ex-football and basketball player from the University of Duke, who was the Obama's personal chef, and perhaps slightly a little more. But that's okay. We live in a time where a certain type of morality is actually okay. It's okay. It's okay to be gay and to be in the White House. It's really okay. It's a type of fluid morality that can be embraced. Oh, that's fine. That's fine. But be damned if you can have an affair with somebody and have to pay that person off, because we know that none of that ever happens. Am I giving Trump a pass on this? Would I want Trump to be a better person? Of course I would. He's president of the United States of America. This is a guy that represents us. You know, I don't really give him a pass for doing it because everybody else is doing it. That's too easy. I'd like him to be a better person. I'd like to think that wherever he is now is not who he was when he made this deal with Stormy Daniels. Well, he was married to Melania, but he wasn't anywhere near the White House. It's not illegal. But they're going to continue to dig and dig and dig and dig and dig and dig and dig just to try to find something impeachable. Meanwhile, he takes a complete beating in the court of public opinion. And I was listening to an interview last night that my good pal Murray down in New Zealand sent to me, and I highly recommend it. It is an interview with Catherine Austin Fitts in The Saker. If you haven't read The Saker's material, I highly recommend it. He's Russian. He has a great command of the English language. He's a really good writer. He's really bright, and he's got a really good handle on sort of the Sino-American dynamic, which at this point in time is in the gutter. Now we're freezing Russian assets in this country. It's not just that we're imposing sanctions. We're freezing assets. Do you know what freezing assets is? Freezing assets is a prelude to war. That's what the Japanese got all pissed off about. The United States froze a bunch of Japanese assets. And they were like, screw you. You know, yeah, we're doing our thing. We're trying to expand the empire of the rising sun. Don't we have the ability, the capability? Don't we have the right to do that? I mean, clearly, you know, you guys have been into empire building. And by that time, the United States clearly been into empire building with incursions into places like the Philippines, Puerto Rico, to some extent Guam. Guam would come out of the war between the United States and Japan. So the United States was in the kind of the nascent stage of empire building. That's what Japan was doing. So we froze their assets and they got pissed off. We said, you know, screw you. We're going to bomb Pearl Harbor. Ironically, they knew they were going to bomb Pearl Harbor and they let it happen. They let it happen. That's on the public record. You know, I've been listening to Joe Rogan a little bit. Emily and I are going to do a big show about Joe Rogan. And I'm looking at his astrology, which I'm going to get into over the weekend. I'm going to write about Rogan. And Rogan's an interesting character because he used to be dabbling on the fringe of conspiratorial thought. Now he's like leaving it all behind. And he says that there are real conspiracies and the bullshit conspiracies take away from the validity of the real ones. And he's right to some extent. You know, I think we have to be selective about our conspiracies. You know, like the Blue Avion conspiracy. I'd move that down the list. Secret space program, I might move that down the list a little bit, but we're going to talk a little bit about that today with SpaceForce. 9/11, I'd keep right at the top of the list. And Rogan is completely off the mark and missing the boat around his 9/11 revisionism. I'll save some of that for when Emily and I get together. But he does have a point, and we look back on what happened during the attack on the Navy at Pearl Harbor. That was clearly a conspiracy. Roosevelt knew it was going to happen. They had the Morse code. They had broken it down. They had intercepted it. They let it happen because they wanted a war. So we're talking about, I don't know how many men died, and let's find out. Let's get exact. I'm going to get exact. Oh, we've got a new participant today's show. It's Rosie. She decided to get on the podcast today. What's happening, Rosie? Yes, I know. It's your turn. What do you have? Do you have something to share about Pearl Harbor? Is that why you're here? Let's see. Pearl Harbor casualties. Here we go. It's Virgo. Let's get specific, shall we? There were 2,335 people, military, who died. Out of that 2,335, 2,008 were Navy personnel, 109 were Marines, 218 were Army, and there were 68 civilians, making the total 2,403 people dead. 1,177 were from the USS Arizona. So think about that for a second. The blood of 2,403 people was at the feet of Franklin Delano Roosevelt. I mean, this is a man that presided over this slaughter and this massacre, which probably could have been avoided. With 2 days' notice, they could have removed most of the ships from Pearl Harbor. Perhaps they knew where the Japanese fighter planes were going to be flying out of. Perhaps with enough knowledge, they could have told the military personnel in Pearl Harbor that they were going to be attacked and get ready for it. And then at that point, it would have been an ambush. But no, none of this happened. Why? Because we needed, or they needed, to sell the war. They needed to bring Japanese Americans into internment camps and to study them, to figure out what sort of dynamics would take place inside of an internment camp. Watching every step of the way how loyalties would either align or become split and divided. As much as they were, for all intents and purposes, prison camps, they were also social experiments. Do you know who oversaw the internments of the Japanese prisoners in World War II? Sam Walton from Walmart. That's what he did. That's what his role was. How crazy is that? How crazy is that? Sam Walton, the guy that made a lot of moves over the course of his lifetime, married a very rich girl while he was at the University of Missouri, hanging out with the equivalent of Missouri's Skull and Bones. Interesting guy, Sam Walton. Anyway, they let it all happen. Now that is a conspiracy. Nobody ever really taught. I mean, oh, did you know about this? Did you know about this? Of course, it happened. It happened. That's how all this shit happens. How do we get into World War I? How do we get into World War II? Well, Roosevelt said, we're in. We're going there. We're going to fight those Nazis. We're going to join with our brothers, the Bolsheviks, the Russians. We're going to wipe out the Social Democratic Party. Even though we helped build the Social Democratic Party. How do you think they got all those tanks and airplanes and V-2 rockets? Really cool uniforms. Ford, GE, IG Farben, Westinghouse. Yeah, these are all American companies that helped build up Germany after World War I. So we helped create those guys. We helped create that force. And this is the story of Western imperialism that has been owned and operated, managed and run by a very select group of people at the top. And 95% of the time, they're connected to one of these fraternities. In most cases, Freemasonry, at the very least, Skull and Bones. And these are the people who have been running the planet for a long time, and they still are. Although now we have the wild card known as the Zionists. They're into play, right? So now we have Trump. And there's this piece now where it feels like, and I never thought I would actually say this, because I've always felt that the powers that be/were, the planetary management team, wants most of this world intact and would avoid World War III as much as they could. And I'm getting to this point now where I'm thinking that that may not necessarily be the case. I'm not sure if it's going to be a currency war. I'm not sure if it will be a data war. I'm not sure if it will be a cyber war. But we are headed in that direction. Anytime you freeze a country's assets, generally speaking, the next step after that is some kind of organized conflict. Well, we saw it in Iraq when we began to freeze the assets of Saddam Hussein. Not long after that, guess what? We're over there and we're kicking up dust. We did it down in Panama with Manuel Noriega. We started to freeze their assets. Next thing you know, we're down there and R&D and all kinds of new shit, new weapons. There's some interesting documentaries about what they brought down to Panama to try out on the Panamanians. You were talking about energy-directed weapons, all kinds of like 21st century, future space war weapons. During the interview with the Saker and Catherine Austin Fitts, the Saker, who's a really smart guy, talks about how the United States is behind on their military. They've got the F-35, which is a turkey. It's a terrible plane, blah, 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 blah. And, he's trying to make a case that the U.S. military is weaker for a number of reasons, one of which is during the 8 years of Obama that they de-emphasized building the military up and creating like the drone strike force, right? That's what his legacy will be, was the development of drones for the use of not just surveillance, but warfare. But what the Saker isn't taking into account is that there is another part of the United States government that has technology that is 50 years beyond what the public can kind of wrap their heads around. So let's say, for instance, we get out to the edge of where technology and arms and munitions and all that stuff brings us. On a local level, let's say for crowd control, they bust out the LRADs. The LRAD is a pretty sophisticated device. Sits on top of an armored vehicle and begins to radiate extreme heat. It's a microwave transmitter to disperse crowds. They also have LRADs that produce an extremely high-pitched frequency. Make your ears bleed. So you want to run away from it and get out of that field of sound. They've got all this stuff. And that's on the table. That's pretty sophisticated, to be quite honest with you. And we know that they have that. Well, what's 50 years beyond that? In California, we've been looking at these extremely intense fires. Extremely hot fires. And one of the things that Deborah Tavares, who is, I think a really important person, she's talked about these DEWs, right? The direct energy weapons. And you look at some of the stuff in California, and I'll tell you what some of the damage, the collateral damage with these fires in California looks like. It looks like some of the cars that were present post 9/11. There are a whole series of images of cars that aren't just like melted, but they're melted and twisted. And it's like, how does a car go from being, relatively sound structure, even though the metal in today's cars isn't anywhere close to the metal in cars, say 40 years ago. We're dealing with alloys and, strange combinations of metal and polymers, and they're all kind of, so when you get in a wreck now, your car just shatters, right? Back in the old days, you had real metal around. These cars today don't have real metal. So that accounts for some of it. But if you look at the cars in and around the Twin Towers, I mean, they look like they've just been not just melted, but they've been absolutely sort of torqued and mutated, almost beyond recognition. Well, you see some of that in these photos that are popping up with the fires in California. So Deborah Tavares and others have claimed that, well, these are directed energy weapons. And so we're not talking about shell casings or anything like that. We're talking about really high, concentrated beams of energy. So this is probably what we're sort of sitting on in terms of weaponry. What people know and see and talk about is just, a lot of it's just show. Like if you're the United States, theoretically, you would want to have a great jet fighter, which the F-35 is not. But maybe what you'd really want is to create kind of a turkey jet fighter. So if you had to sell it to other people in the world, that they would be basically flying the kind of the same thing, and they'd have problems. Well, your real like jet force or the things that you are going to unleash during any kind of extended conflict would be nothing like that thing that's on the marketplace, which is really what it is. It's on the marketplace. And I remember hearing stories about Gulf War I and Gulf War II where there'd be people that'd just be completely eviscerated. They would just be there and they wouldn't be there. So think along these terms, because what it represents is it represents another version of we're living in a reality that's like Alice in Wonderland. That it's not real. And we're seeing this again and again and again and again. So the Saker was saying that, well, the United States is at a, in a weaker, more vulnerable position because of their military. I say he's wrong. I'd say on the surface that's the case. But beneath the surface, no, I don't think so. I don't think so. Trump's SpaceForce likely is already here. It's interesting that he brought this stuff up in the midst of everything that's going on. Him and Kennedy, they have so many parallels in a lot of ways. Kennedy's dedication to NASA and the evolution of the space program, and for Trump, the whole SpaceForce thing. Fascinating stuff. He's under fire, though, and one has to wonder how much he can take. And one of the important and salient pieces that the Saker and Catherine Austin Fitts cover is that this is not good for the country. This is not good for the country. Like this ongoing conflict between Trump and the media and the deep state and what I would call the neoliberals is doing damage to the country. It's doing damage to the people. It's doing damage to our relations and creating a ever widening gulf between the left and the right, which I talk about pretty consistently. Now, Trump is not really helping because he goes through these weird phases. Like, this is one of the strangely frustrating things about it, and I'm sure there are people that will say, 40 chess, 40 chess, 40 chess. Like when he went to Helsinki and he met with Putin, that was pretty bodacious because he knew that there wasn't a lot of patience around him hanging out with Putin, kowtowing with Putin, whatever you want to fill in the blank with. So in a lot of ways, it was really bold, controversial, in your face, fuck you kind of move. It's a move that people on some level really like and respect. Like, hey, how many times have you seen people do that? Hey, I really like what that guy's doing. He's doing it. Doesn't have a care in the world. There's this kid who showed up on the Little League World Series. He played in the regional finals. His name is Alfred Dalia. This kid became an internet sensation. I think he was playing for New Jersey. He's this heavy kid, right? He's the antithesis of what it looks and feels like to be an athlete and a jock, which is like this manifestation of Apollo, right? The hero. This kid is anything like that. I loved him. He says, they do their little introductions. He says, hi, my name is Alfred Dalia. They call me Big Al and I hit dingers. I loved it. He became an internet sensation. Why? Why did 12-year-old Alfred Dalia, also known as Big Al, the kid he became an internet sensation because he didn't look the part. He didn't have the great hair, the symmetrical face. I mean, clearly this is a kid, who looks like one of McDonald's most preferred customers. He didn't have a care in the world. Didn't have a care in the world. By the way, he hit a couple of home runs. So he does hit dingers. See, this is what people like about that Trump move. I'm going to Russia. Fuck you. I'm going to sit down. I'm going to talk with Putin, and we're going to hammer this shit out. And to hell with my critics. But then what does he do when he comes back? He does a 180, which is in some ways very much like his chart. He's backtracking and, he's just, And then he's like, okay, well, we know for a fact now that the Russians are going to interfere with the midterms. This is what his administration is saying. But it's never enough for the left. Never, 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 never. Never enough. Never enough. Trump could open the borders tomorrow. And it wouldn't be enough for the left. They'd bitch, they'd complain, he's just trying to win the left vote. It should have happened years ago. Does he think it's going to assuage his white guilt? Too bad. You made your rotten little bed in your crummy little hotel. Now you sleep in it. There's nothing this guy can do. Nothing. Absolutely nothing. The only thing that I think that really is the hook in Trump is that likely he's being blackmailed. I think most people in Washington are blackmailed. And that's why nothing ever gets done. That's why nothing ever changes. Every now and then you have somebody who does some token time, like Louis Scooter Libby, whose birthday was the other day. I talked about him. That's when Mueller and Comey's buddy Fitzgerald, his name James Fitzgerald, his name Jim Fitzgerald. He was the guy that was going after the neocons inside of the Bush administration. And they got a little fish. They got a Libby fish. Little Scooter fish. Nobody ever really does much time. It's because they have dirt on everybody. People capitulate. Or their family may be threatened, or whatever it is. That's why nothing ever really happens. Like Trump right now should fucking fire Jeff Sessions. Fire him. Fire Rod Rosenstein. Fire these people. Get them out. You're already going through an extreme amount of fire, criticism, hatred. People are trying to impeach your ass, right and left. This is the Obama, Hillary Clinton, Soros side of the left-right paradigm. And they're going after him. And they've been at war with him from even before the election started. This is what they're doing. And we're in the crossfire of this fucking bullshit. And quite frankly, I think enough is enough. It's enough. Is he perfect? No. Did he steal the election? No, he didn't steal the election. Hillary lost the damn election. She lost it. Period. End of story. Well, she won the popular vote. Yeah, really? Let's go look at how many times people voted in places like Arizona, New Mexico, Nevada, and California. Jill Stein, after the election was over, what did she do? She went in and looked at voter fraud in places like Wisconsin and Michigan. She raised a bunch of money. And what did she find? Yeah, there was fraud, but it wasn't on Trump's side of the ledger sheet. How far did that exhumation last? How long did it last? It didn't last very long. These people are butthurt. They're angry. They're internationalists. They're globalists. Like Trump, they have one foot in that world. I wouldn't be surprised. He's a freaking Gemini. Uranus conjunct Sun. He may have one foot in that world just as much as he may have one foot in another, camp. I mean, that's kind of who he is to some extent. But this shit has got to stop. It has got to stop. It is damaging the country. It is damaging the morale of the country. It is creating a widening gyre between families, friends, lovers, husbands, wives, children, and parents. And this is exactly what they want to do. It's got to stop. And it's got to stop fucking right now. And if Trump doesn't understand this, if he still thinks that this is some kind of art of the deal, he's going to throw in a bunch of chaos and see how people react and, start picking people off. And it almost feels like science gone too far. It's like one of these science fiction movies from the 50s where something's gotten out of the lab because the experiment's gotten out of control. And I think it kind of has. Now, there are people who say, 5D chess, 4D chess. Hey, hang in there, trust it. You're going to see this, you're going to see. Great. There's that soporific. Just, have a little lick of the Q pop. And I'm not saying that Q is bad, per se, okay? I have gone on record. I think Q is an important function of awakening for a wide swath of people who will do it in a group. They will not do it individually, because to do it individually is a scary proposition. Scary proposition. But doing it in a group makes it much more comfortable. So I actually encourage that. I think the awakening process is important. But and I'm going to talk about this today too. This is we're actually at a very dangerous point with that, with the awakening process. But we just keep waiting. Like Catherine Austin Fitts talks about the 40,000 indictments like they're a done deal. Like maybe they are. Maybe they're on the record. People have said, yeah, here they are. You can go find all these things. Okay, great, fine. Now they're saying, what is it, 10/22, like October? or 10, 11, 10, there's a week, there's a day in October where it is like a drop dead date. And you better be ready for, like, this is it. If you are, a QAnon person, you know what I'm talking about. Then here's what I think. And I talk about people, or talk with people on Facebook. And they'll send me information, they'll send me stuff, and it's like, especially with Q. Well, it better fucking happen soon. Okay? Because with each passing day, more and more and more damage is being done to this country. Now, one of the things that Obama was able to do while he was president is that, he'd go over to Europe, or he'd go over to Asia, or he'd go over to the Middle East, and oh my God, I loved him. I loved him. He was like a rock star. Couldn't do anything wrong in those parts of the world. He goes to Norway and he gets a freaking Nobel Prize. A Nobel Peace Prize. For what? For what? What did he do? He didn't do anything. And by the way, in the middle of his second term, they should have taken it away because of all the killing and death that was happening in places like Afghanistan and northern Iraq. Are you kidding me? He should have got the Nobel Peace, Piece prize, for all the body pieces and body parts. They should have revoked that thing. Sorry, got to take it away. Of course, they'll never do that. Abroad, the United States is taking a huge hit. Of course, except for Israel, where they love the United States and they love Trump. And that's all that matters, right? Israel, maybe Saudi Arabia. Everywhere else, it doesn't really matter. It doesn't, fuck them. As long as Israel loves us, we don't really care. It's bad. We're taking a huge, look, in some ways it's to be expected because some of the stuff that Trump is talking about, has done, it's not popular. It is not popular in a globalist society and a globalist culture. And this is what's been cultivated since the summer of love. We have reached the apotheosis of the summer of love. 2017, right? You go back to 1967. 2017, what are we talking about? 67 to 2007 is what, 40 years? 2017 was the 50th anniversary of the summer of love. It is the apotheosis. Everything that sprouted during the summer of love, it has come to bloom and fruition in 2017. Those 70 years are interesting, aren't they? They're really interesting. Like 1957, you kind of get the birth of rock and roll, and Elvis Presley. 1947 finds us in the midst of World War II, just getting ready to kind of get out of it and wind that down. 1917, the Federal Reserve Act. So the sevens are interesting times. So what Trump is trying to do is to reverse some of these trends, for better or worse, that are the apotheosis of globalism. And some of them I agree with and some of them I don't. Tying yourself to corporate shills, corporatism, the environment, degrading the environment, not a huge fan. But, some would say that Obama did the same thing. I don't want to get into a he said, she said, but I understand why Trump is unpopular. And there are some things that he's trying to do that I think are actually worthwhile and meaningful. It takes a lot of heat. Here, let me give you an example. I want to shift into this South Africa stuff. There's a lot going on in South Africa right now. There are farms that are being taken away from, you guessed it, white farmers. It's happening. Trump tweeted about it. And do you know what they said about Trump? Here. Let me read this to you. Let's get into this. This is really important. This kind of sets up the world that we're living in right now. Okay? This is the level of utter conflation in newspeak. So this comes out of South Africa. This is a tweet from one day ago. This is South African government at Government ZA. South Africa will speed up the pace of land reform in a careful and inclusive manner that does not divide our nation. Hashtag land expropriation at real Donald Trump at presidency ZA. Trump, a day before that, says, I have asked Secretary of State at Secretary Pompeo to closely study the South African land and farm seizures and expropriations and the large-scale killing of farmers. South African government is now seizing land from white farmers. That's at Tucker Carlson. That's a quote from at Tucker Carlson and at Fox News. So here we have Trump's skewed sympathy for white South African farmers. Trump bemoans persecuted white farmers in South Africa. With his South Africa tweet, Trump became a megaphone for white supremacists. Trump's racist coda to a terrible week. The president's invocation of white nationalist talking points on post-apartheid South Africa are more than just a distraction. So let's be clear about this now. What they're trying to do is, because the majority of farmers in South Africa happen to be white, Trump is actually looking at something that is fairly disturbing, that their lands are being expropriated. Now, that said, if the script was flipped, would he say something similar? Let's say everybody in South Africa who was farming was black and the government was primarily white and they seized those lands. Would he be saying the same thing? I would venture to say yes, and let me tell you why. And it's not for the reasons that you think, that Trump is, and I don't really believe Trump is a racist, by the way. I really don't. Although Omarosa will tell you differently. Oh, she was fine hanging out with him for 15 years. Right, she was on that gravy train for 15 fucking years, and now all of a sudden he's a racist. Give me a break. South Africa has a lot of resources. South Africa has diamonds. South Africa has a lot of resources. They're a player in the global economy. If the lands are seized in South Africa, and they do as shitty a job as they did in Rhodesia, Zambia, right? Now Zambia, formerly Rhodesia, and I'll talk about that. Then South Africa is going to be in real trouble financially, and that will have an impact on the global economy because of the resources, primarily diamonds, that flow out of South Africa. So there's an economic piece that is connected to this that should have Trump and other people who are connected to the global economy concerned. Now, I know that when it comes to human rights, that apparently Anglo-Saxons, Caucasians, Northern Europeans, they don't have any. There's no such thing as human rights when it comes to being white. Plain and simple. Bottom line. That's the way it is. You don't have any rights. You have somehow abdicated your rights. You've abdicated your rights. Why? Well, because everything on this planet is your fucking fault. So you have no rights. And anything can be done to you. It is open season now. It's open season. This is kind of the vibe, right? This is the vibe. And the only way you can get around being out of sort of the open season period, phase, it's a phase, it will come to an end, is if you renounce, right? It's kind of like, what happened during the Inquisition. And you renounce things. Oh, I renounce my whiteness. I renounce all of this. I'm guilty. Guilty as charged. Please forgive me. And then you become, an anti-white advocate. It's the only way through this. It's the only way you can somehow, get through time where a certain segment of society is in the crosshairs. And it is. It totally is. And I don't believe it's fair. And people will say, oh, fuck you. It's not fair for other people. Well, that's true. That's absolutely true. But yet it's another divide and conquer tactic and strategy. And clearly there is an agenda afoot. All right. Well, I want to read you something. So this is from Quartz Africa, which is a pretty interesting blog. Quartz Africa. And it's called Expropriating Land Without Compensation is Impossible. Taken from Zimbabwe. So one of the things that the authors here, Johan Kirsten and Wandil Salobu, are talking about is that if you're going to expropriate land, then the people who you're essentially expropriate is a nice fancy word for stealing. This is what happens in socialist/communist backed governments. They expropriate land, money, resources, companies, bank accounts. And they do without compensation. I'm going to read this to you. And it's a pretty good article. I'm probably going to read half of it. This goes all the way back to March 1st, by the way. So they're already looking at what's going to take place. And they know this. They know what happened in Rhodesia. Terrible. They took the lands. People don't know what to do with the lands. And total fuck story. They basically were like starving, okay? South Africa will now begin to reclaim land taken from black people near a century ago without a payback to the current owners, dividing public sentiment along fears of a land grab and cries for justice. On February 27th, lawmakers overwhelmingly voted in favor to amend the Constitution to allow land expropriation without compensation. This is a marked shift in policy and comes at a time when land reform through both the state and market has made more progress than experts and policy makers care to admit. The African National Congress's decision to back a motion by the more radical newcomers, the economic freedom fighters, also disregarded the facts about the stalled progress of existing land redistribution and restitution programs in post-apartheid South Africa. The decision comes after the ANC chose to formally adopt the policy at their December conference after a heated debate. Ironically, South Africa's decision comes at a time when the Zimbabwean government has established a compensation committee under its Land Acquisition Act to allow for dispossessed white former commercial farmers to be compensated for land seized 18 years ago. Let me stop there for a second. Zimbabwe has gone through a shift where they're realizing that they really fucked up. Now, I don't know how much these farmers are going to be able to get, but clearly it's not going to be worth what that land would be today. Clearly it's not going to be worth the hell that they went through. These people just don't come to your land. And back then, this is all pre-internet stuff, right? With Zimbabwe, formerly Rhodesia. I'm sorry, Zambia, not Zimbabwe. It was really violent. Really violent, bloody violent. And a lot of this violence is already taking place in South Africa. Like, it's not like, they're getting, this is the one thing that pisses me off about the media. I mean, there have been people in South Africa that have been roughed up, bloodied, beaten up. And nobody ever talks about it. It's because at this point in time, and I'm hitting the third rail here. And what I'm talking about is about as close to, kind of being anti-Semitic as possible, is that if you are white Anglo-Saxon Protestant, you don't have any rights. And what I mean by that, sure you have rights, but in the eyes of the media, in the eyes of social justice reformation, you have no rights. You have no right for rights or right to rights. And anything that happens to you is fair game because, motherfucker, you deserve it. No sympathy, no empathy. This is what happens when we live in a godless world. And I'm not here to make a stand for, white culture as being, the epitome of society and everything that's, grand and good. And I'm not making a stand for that. There's a lot of stuff, as a culture and a race, as a people, that we have not done right. There's a lot of stuff that we've done wrong. And clearly, I'd be the first person to admit it. But you can't use those things as an amalgam and as a linchpin, literally a linchpin, to hang the entire race and hang the entire culture. Because I can quote you chapter and verse of how many times, there's been a lot of charity, a lot of giving, a lot of openness, a lot of care. It's not really what I'm here to talk about. I'm not here to, try to make a case for this. What I'm trying to establish is that there are things happening in the world and things that are not cool, right? They're just not cool. And they're not being talked about. I can go right up to, go from the south of Africa to the north of Africa. Getting into the Middle East and Yemen. There's a lot happening there that's not being reported on. It's not cool. Right? But I'm using this case now because it's important. And the reason why it's important is because it's being used, again, as this centrifugal force to pull people apart. Trump is now a white nationalist and a racist because he's standing up for the farmers who are having their land taken without any compensation. Let me continue to read this, okay? All right. Former commercial farmers be compensated for land seized 18 years ago. It also begs the question why the ANC and the EFF are taking a position that its revolutionary counterparts from across the Limpopo River are departing from. Yeah, there was a revolution that took place in Rhodesia and South Africa. And now, Zambia, right? Well, or Zimbabwe, rather. I'm getting too confused. My apologies. Nonetheless, if the Zimbabwean experience were not sufficient to proffer some fundamental lessons for South Africa, then it would be prudent to point out a number of facts that should call on policymakers to reconsider this new direction. 18 years later, right, Zimbabwe, formerly Rhodesia, is looking back at what they've done and they said, we made a horrible mistake. With the benefit of hindsight, the Zimbabwe experience tells us what is the notion of expropriation without compensation is a bad idea. Zimbabweans might have seized the land without compensation 18 years ago, but they collectively paid for it through 8 consecutive years of economic decline that led to job losses, deindustrialization, and a loss of agricultural export revenues. In 2009, economist Eddie Cross estimated the cost of Zimbabwe's land reform at $20 billion, which included lost export revenues, food aid imports, and economic growth foregone, which could have sustained Zimbabwe's once promising economy had it not seized farms without compensation. After unemployment rates of over 90% and tepid growth in recent years, the Zimbabwe government is going back to correct the fundamental mistake it made nearly 2 decades ago, which is to compensate farmers whose estimated compensation costs are set to amount to $11 billion. The moral of the story is if the government declines to directly compensate its commercial sector for land improvements, at the very least, then someone else will have to pay for it indirectly. The compensation effect, as we would like to call it, will see the entire economy and its citizenry paying for land seizures through lost agricultural export revenues, job opportunities, and more. In the South African scenario, there are 2 immediate points that are worth noting. The difficulty in implementing expropriation without compensation and the implications of the policy. Firstly, if the Constitution is amended accordingly to allow for land to be expropriated without compensation, how would the law cater for the assets on the farm and improvements made on the land? I'm going to get to that. And I'm going to read you something from a South African farmer. The land on its own is roughly 10% of the total value of a typical farm. If fixed and movable assets are taken into account, would sunk investments that make up the 90%, like general farm infrastructure, machinery, and other investments, be subject to expropriation without compensation too? If compensation is due for farm assets and not the land itself, then the technical argument that arises is, would it be prudent for the government to pay 90% in compensating farmers for improvement to the land in order to obtain 10% that represents the actual land value? Second is the complication that would emerge from the existing fact that South African agricultural land is heavily indebted. Farm debt emanating from title deeds to secure loans already stands at over $13.7 billion. So if they expropriate the land, they're taking on the $13.7 billion debt because there's going to be nobody there to pay it off. If farmers aren't compensated, will the state repay the banks who are de facto partial owners of that land through debt? If government exonerates itself from compensating the banks, would this would translate into a $13.7 billion wiped off the bank's books. If government commits to cover this debt, it contradicts the policy, becoming instead expropriation with compensation, except that the money goes to the bank and not the farmer. You think the banks would love to get their hands on that money directly instead of over time? Do you think the banks might force the hand of the ANC for that compensation? Damn right they will. And who's to say that the banks themselves may not just take over that land once the land has been expropriated? We own this land. We're not in a contractual fiduciary relationship with the farmers anymore. This is our land. What do you think the ANC is going to do? This is going to be very interesting. If it happens that the government determines the value of infrastructure investments on the farms and then uses that same value to cover the debt that is owed to the banks, then there are situations that could arise where farmers receive zero compensation. There might also be situations where seized farms are insolvent, in which case the government would have to pay the banks the balance of what is owed by the farmers, whose land they are seizing. This scenario is already permissible under the current Constitution and does not require any amendments of any law. So Zimbabwe's growth has slowed since 2011 and is now going negative. We saw this in Zimbabwe when commercial farmers took the Zimbabwean government to court over land seizures. The courts were inundated with litigation. that would have taken the government an entire generation to resolve. Then, in another moment of madness in 2003, the Constitution was amended to nullify all those cases brought to the courts by commercial farmers. In that instance, the Zimbabwe government wanted to get rid of the headaches that emerged from land seizures, but wiped off $10 billion in land value. With the benefits of the Zimbabwe experience, most of which people are quick to ignore and dismiss, we learn an important lesson needs to be the hallmark of land reform thinking in South Africa. This lesson is that there is no such thing as expropriation without compensation in a quasi-capitalist economy. The history of land expropriation under apartheid has left a painful wound in South African society, which indeed ought to be corrected. However, the enduring principle of equitable and just, not necessarily market value compensation in contemporary economics serves as an important reference point. If the South African government seizes property for free, someone somewhere within the economy will have to pay, whether directly through loss in current and future on-farm job opportunities, as well as export revenues, or through protracted economic decline that will erode the purchasing power of money, losses in pensions and savings, and deindustrialization that will destroy future economic growth and off-farm job opportunities for the current generation. You see, this is a domino that would fall inside the global economy, and from that perspective, I think Trump has some skin in the game. Let's say, for instance, that happens. And let's say, for instance, the South African government is bleeding cash. Well, they're going to look to a suitor to help them out of their morass, right? Who do they go to? The World Bank? Well, they're probably up to their collective third eye in debt to the World Bank. More than likely, they would look at somebody like China to come in and save their ass. And now, all of a sudden, China's got a toehold. Don't you think China would love that farmland in South Africa? I know they would. Shit, they love crappy land in Siberia. I mean, they're up there trying to farm land in Siberia. That is the Chinese. They're licking their chops. And if you're Trump and you're looking at, this kind of global trade war and turf war that's going on with China, do you want the Chinese to get a toehold in South Africa? Clearly the answer is no. I'm going to read you something. This is from a South African farmer. Let me see if I can find this. This will tell you what will happen when this takes place in South Africa. Let me just do this here. Okay, so this is from Henry Macau back in August 12th. And the title of this is White Farmer Urges ANC to Think Ahead. He wrote this. I'm going to read this to you. It's anonymous. It says, what will happen when the ANC takes my farm? The farmer writes, I have no doubt that the ANC government has given a lot of thought to the topic of expropriation without compensation. However, I think they might not have fully comprehended the consequences of such a policy. As a farmer, I thought it might be useful to enlighten them as to the course of action I would take once my farm is targeted for EWC. Before I continue, I'd like to emphasize this is not a threat, nor delivered with the mindset of a saboteur. It is merely a description of the sequence of events that would unfold in the event of such a policy being enforced. I would immediately identify all the movable assets on my farm and start selling them or placing them in a suitable storage facility. I list these below simply to demonstrate to non-farmers what makes a farm functional and profitable. The first to go would be all livestock, followed by all the machinery, including tractors, pumps, silos, center pivots, electrical transformers, irrigation equipment, water troughs, implements, and piping. I would strip the dairy and sell the bulk of the bulk tanks, milking machines, etc. I would take down all internal fencing on the farm and recoup what I could. All sheds would be disassembled, and all houses and all other buildings would be stripped of anything sellable, including their roofs. I would cancel the 5 ESCOM points on the farm, and obtain refunds on the deposits I've paid on them. I would retrench all my staff and pay them off in accordance with the Labor Act. I would then strip all the staff accommodation on the farm and sell what I could. With the sale of all my livestock and cessation of the farming operation, I would immediately default on the R.55 million, that's Rand, IOFMB, but I wouldn't worry as the farm is the loan security and I don't really own anything else. So he's going to default on his loan, 5.5 million Rand. When the day came to leave the farm, I would hand the keys over to the new owners, but I'm not quite sure what they would do, as there'd be no roof on the farmhouse and there would be nothing to farm on the farm. It would just be a piece of land. But that's okay because the ANC says owning land makes you wealthy. Here are the consequences. When you take the sequence of events described above and multiply it on a national scale, you see another consequence of events unfolding. The new farmers arrive on the farm, but there is no livestock, machinery, or working capital to continue the operation. They go to the banks to borrow money, a good farming habit, but the banks are sitting on Rand 160 billion defaulted. Debt book from old farmers who won't lend a cent to agriculture. Right, they're already sitting, so they won't be able to get money. So this is where China comes into play. China might actually drop in and say, "Hey, but you're gonna have to give something up, right? The ANC will have to go into bed with the Chinese." And the Chinese are incredibly shrewd. So the ANC begins to lose its autonomy. In China, South Africa indirectly becomes a de facto vassal state for China. Think about that for a moment. So this is, I'll read this. I'll just reread this bullet point. The government doesn't have the money, which would be far more than the Rand 160 billion mentioned above, to recapitalize and finance all the farms. So most of the farms either fall derelict or are farmed at a subsistence level, like barely getting by. The government doesn't have the money, which would be far more than the Rand 160 billion mentioned above. To recap, that's just for the land, right? We're talking about the recapitalization that has to take place. It's crazy. To recapitalize and finance all the farms, so most of the farms either fall derelict or farmed at subsistence level. There was a massive but short-term surplus of beef, sheep, and poultry products due to the sell-off by the previous farmers. So this brings prices down drastically in the short term, but eventually the meat runs out and there is nothing to replace it. Meat prices skyrocket. Dairy products cease almost immediately after the livestock cull sell-off, and within weeks there was a critical shortage of all dairy products. Importing is impossible due to the government's actions, which have decimated the value of the rand. There is the Trump concern for the government, the global government, right, or the government that connects into the global economy. Maize lasts quite a bit longer and with careful rationing will endure until the next season, but there's no crop in the ground for next year due to the new farmers' lack of machinery, experience, and access to credit. All agricultural co-ops and suppliers very quickly cease operation and or go bankrupt and retrench all their staff. They cannot survive by selling single bags of seed and fertilizer to subsistence farmers. All processors of agricultural products such as meat, dairy, and maize cease production due to lack of product and retrench all their staff. Rural municipalities start to feel the pinch as there are no longer any farmers paying rates, and the agricultural businesses in towns have also sold up and left. Smaller rural towns that depended on agriculture eventually collapse, and rural communities are forced to travel long distances to major centers to find ever-dwindling supplies. Ironically, the EUC movement creates more urbanization as the rural folk flee the agricultural desert that has been created. Perhaps in alignment with Agenda 21, Agenda 2030, this might actually be something that they want. So we'll put an asterisk there. With all the unemployed farm workers, as well as those who have lost their jobs from other sectors, there is an unsustainable demand on the UIF system, and soon it collapses. The social grant system teeters as the ripple effect from agricultural collapse enters all sectors, and the tax base is shredded. Food riots become common, and genuine hunger and poverty are widespread. Unlike Zimbabwe, the South African population has nowhere to run. Because with Zimbabwe, they ran into South Africa. Can't really do that in Zimbabwe. With the white farmer no longer available, an available target, and the true value of land revealed in all its fallacy, the masses turn on the only target they have left, the ANC. So this farmer makes a really, really good case that the ANC should think carefully about expropriation without compensation. The article that I read you before is from people who are from Zimbabwe, and they're going through, or have gone through, something very, very similar. And life was hell on earth in Zimbabwe when they took the land away. And it was hell on earth during the expropriation process, and it was hell on earth afterwards because there was no food, and the economy was in major free fall. I mean, this is typical of a socialist, communist kind of government plan scheme. Let's take the resources, let's take the land, and starve the fuck out of the people. And meanwhile, the champions of such a system, said system, will raise their fists in the air. They'll clap, they'll applaud everything that's going on. Oh, this is it. This is a model for change. This is how it's got to be done. The United States, people in the United States, the Democratic Party, the progressives, the lefts, should look at what's happening in South Africa, and that should be a model for change moving forward. Trust me on this. This is what will happen. But it is so short-sighted, so incredibly short-sighted. And, maybe, just maybe, if it's a complete, clear-cut, policy here, they're just going to do a controlled burn and, wipe everything out and, create this urbanization, let the Chinese come in, let the Chinese run the farms. Maybe, just maybe, this is part of the plan. I don't know. But I think it's a terrible idea. And I also think that from a human rights perspective, everybody has rights on this planet. Like, we all have rights. And the rights are that we are the children of God, right? We are the children of this magnificent creative force. And so our rights are that, we need to be treated as such, right? Like, and it doesn't really matter, what color your skin is. I think we all have the divine right to be on this planet and to treat each other as, like my own personal philosophy of life. It's like, when I go out in the world, I am not out to get anybody. I'm not out to put anybody down. If there's commonality and, uniqueness and things that are interesting and novelty, I'll throw down with anybody. Right? I mean, that's kind of where I come from. I'm not out there looking for trouble. I'm not out there looking, to start a fight or, demand that, that my position be the position that should be the de facto position over everybody I meet. It's not the case. And that's not really how the world works at an intimate, personal level. It's just not. It's how it works from an ideological level, but ideologies don't fly. They're not great. But at the same time, I also think that we have to be really fully conscious and aware that, and this goes for anybody, if you're being screwed over or you're seeing some form of, theoretical injustice, and you need to really be able to stand up for it, right? And so it goes across the entire spectrum. So when I see what's happening with these people in South Africa, or I see what's happening with people in Yemen, or I see what's happening with people in Palestine, or what's happening with people in Venezuela, for that matter, right? I mean, this is an important topic of conversation, and none of them should trump the other. In that we're all stronger when we're all treated a lot more humanely and not subjected to these avaricious ideologies, whether it's globalism, Zionism, communism, socialism, rampant free market capitalism that has, it takes no prisoners, right? There's no quarter. It's important stuff. And to twist this into Trump being a nationalist or a white nationalist or white, it's just utter bullshit. It's just part of the propaganda machine now that we constantly have to sift through. And it's got to fucking stop. I'm sorry. It has to stop. And how it's going to stop, is it going to be a pissy match between people like Mike Cernovich and Jack Posobiec and the people on the alt-right and the people on the alt-left, and is this going to go on for a while? These firefights over Twitter. Is this how it's going to happen? Are these the trenches of the social change? In it actually having to stop at some point? I don't know. I was watching this trailer, LeBron James. They got plans for LeBron James, by the way. LeBron James, the elite have plans for LeBron freaking James. I have never seen anybody lifted to the level of his status ever. When it comes to sports, soon it'll be entertainment. LeBron James, from a sports level, I think they're better. It's all about Michael versus LeBron. Michael versus LeBron. I think Michael Jordan is a better basketball player than LeBron. I do. LeBron could do better things. He could do more things. LeBron could shoot a three-pointer better than Michael. LeBron is just a physical specimen like we haven't seen him. He's a beast, right? It's like Superman. But Michael was a better basketball player. And I didn't really even care for Michael. It wasn't like I grew up in an era. I was like, oh, Michael Jordan, I love Michael. No, I didn't really care for Michael Jordan. I think Michael Jordan's got a lot of really dark skeletons in his closet. Michael Jordan was heavily involved in gambling. He was running around with underworld types. There's that weird, bizarre story with his father, James, who got killed driving through, North Carolina, South Carolina. Very, sketchy stuff. Really sketchy stuff. There's rumors that Michael's a Freemason. And, it's like, I don't think Michael Jordan is a really good person. In fact, he sounds like a kind of a, not a very good dude. But I still think he's a better player than LeBron James. And I think that they wanted to bring Michael into that elite circle. And he kind of got there, like he has his own team. It was at the Charlotte Hornets, who are, they're perennially terrible. Michael would, he loves to gamble, loves to play golf. I don't think, is he really a basketball executive? I don't think so. But I think they tried to bring him into the inner circle. Look at everything they did. The huge deals with Nike and Disney. And I think that ultimately he's a bit tainted in some ways. And they couldn't bring him to the level of LeBron. LeBron is huge, man. I watch a lot of sports TV. I watch a lot of stuff on Fox. And LeBron is always the talking point on these Fox shows. They talk about him all the time. All the time. I watched this show with Skip Bayless and Shannon Sharp. And when LeBron was in Cleveland, the tones and the colors and the hues for the show sort of resembled the tones and the colors and the hues of the Cleveland Cavaliers. And now that LeBron is in LA, the tones and the hues of the show represent the colors of the Lakers. And even the, Skip and Shannon, they tend to wear sort of LA Laker sort of tinted clothing. I mean, everything is, not so subliminal in some ways. But they got plans for LeBron. And he's in LA now, and he's making move after move after move. And he's got a HBO special series called The Barbershop. And the first one, I think, debuts in about 2 weeks. And Jon Stewart is a guest. And one of the highlights from the trailer is, there's Jon Stewart. He says, we're tribal. We're tribal people at heart. And I'll tell you about the only thing that would ever really unite us? And, there's Snoop Dogg and LeBron and Candace Parker and Maverick Carter's in there. And they're all like, what? And Jon Stewart says, fucking aliens. It would take a fucking alien invasion to unite the people of the planet. He's right. He's right. I've had that thought for years now. Shit, Bill Cooper talked about that. And they're like, oh, wow. Wow, that's dope. Whoa, that's dope. What a dope comment. Whoa. Bill Cooper talked about that years ago. We all, shit. But now he's Jon Stewart, gets to be on the show. They got big plans for LeBron. I could see LeBron being president of the United States. Easily. Even if the Lakers suck, he'll still be president. Or they'll try to. One of his buddies is Warren Buffett. And LeBron is a Capricorn. And the elite love that kind of Baphomet vibration, right? Because Capricorn is bathymetric. Just like Tiger Woods. The elite love Tiger Woods. They love him. It's like a fetish. Like Tiger Woods has not won a major tournament in a long time. But every weekend I read about Tiger Woods, and so it usually starts around Wednesday on CBS Sports. There's like 60 other golfers, a lot of whom have won tournaments recently. But who do we see? Tiger gets ready to take on the competition. Yeah, he'll take on the competition. He'll put up a good fight, and he'll lose. And every week they do this. It's like, Tiger, 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 Tiger. If Tiger was just a regular golfer, I could find somebody statistically analogous to Tiger, and they would never put him on the homepage of CBS Sports. Never. But it's like, he's a cap. I think he and LeBron are born in the same day. He's like a fetish. Let's put him out there. Let's put him out there. Let's put him out there. And on the sports shows. Now they're putting Tiger together with Phil Mickelson to have a playoff, a one-on-one playoff. It's like, the shootout at the OK Corral. Problem is they're both way over the hill. Their game is, it's not what it was. 15 years ago, a one-on-one with Tiger and Phil was pretty interesting. Now it's like, does anybody really care? Oh, they will because it's Tiger, and it'll give him a chance to win. Well, see, you can't win against all those young guys. But I tell you what, why don't we do a Tiger versus Phil? Oh, great idea. Oh, so it was such a great idea. It's so highly rated. Well, let's do a Tiger versus David Duval. Yeah, let's do that. So now they can bring basically, this is where Tiger is. If he was a boxer, Tiger would be fighting, they used to call them tomatoes. Tomato sacks, right? The guys that you just beat up and they bleed easy. That's kind of where Tiger is in his career. He's be the equivalent of Muhammad Ali fighting a variation of Chuck Wepner's over and over again at the end of his career. I could see this. And I got mixed feelings about Tiger. I get into conspiratorial territory with Tiger. MK Ultra, his father. LeBron's he's a whole different entity unto himself. Keep your eye on the rising star of LeBron James. They got big plans for Mr. LeBron. Big plans. They want to make him global, even more global than like there's almost like an avatar like sort of quality that's associated with LeBron. That's what they're trying to build. That's his aura. Interesting. So where are we with everything? It's a lot. Do we have any chats in the old chat room here? Any chatting going on? I got not one chat. Somebody from New York City is calling me. I think this is a potential client. I'm going to message them. There we go. All right. I think Trump might fire Sessions. I think that's getting close. He started to get some support inside of the Republican Party. Chuck Grassley apparently now is one of Trump's allies around Sessions. At some point, Sessions becomes a liability. What is that? What is that? What is that point of liability? Question mark. It may not be his dragging his heels with, all that FISA stuff, and no, it might be something else. When he becomes a liability to the more mainstream and sort of rhino members of Congress, and it looks like that's what's happening, then he's in trouble. He's in trouble. What else did I want to talk about today? There's something else. Oh, right. I should almost do a whole show on this, and maybe I will. And maybe, Emily and I, because we're going to do something on the Joe Rogan phenomenon and why Joe Rogan is popular and an important figure, and in some ways, not how you think. I think we're coming, maybe we could just make this and blow this up into a bigger piece. I think we are coming to the end of the age of conspiracy. And it's a good thing, and it's a bad thing. When I think about conspiracy, I think of rules for radicals. And there is a rule inside of rules for radicals. And it has to do with if an action has become stagnant or lost momentum, it's time to move on. And I feel like we're at that point with conspiracy and, how do I say this, getting to the bottom of the rabbit hole. Because we're at a point in time where there's so much out there. And so many people are and have been throwing things around for a very, very long time. And with an accelerated momentum over, say, like the last 3 years. Like, I think a lot of this really exploded prior to Trump just getting elected. And when there's no resolution, that's when the action becomes stagnant. The energy begins to become stale. And so this is why we're coming to an end in a lot of ways of this idea of conspiracy and getting to the bottom of the rabbit, because there's no resolution. We're not seeing anything sort of grab hold, and there's not the aha kind of moment. Now, in QAnon world, that won't be the case, because they're going to continue to broadcast the fact that things are happening, you just don't see them. So that allows the momentum of whatever's taking place to continue to, for all intents and purposes, move forward. But at some point, there's, and Joe Rogan is kind of a canary in the coal mine around this. And Emily and I are going to talk about it, that he was very pro-conspiratorial. He entertained a lot of stuff. And then all of a sudden, he turned the faucet off. And now he's into debunking. And I have thoughts around that. And we'll talk about that when we get to the show. But it's an important piece to kind of wrap your head around, because there is this moment in the event horizon where people that are quote-unquote conspiracy theorists, or people that are trying to find the truth, are going to be labeled heretics, and not in a very good way. And the amount of scorn and vitriol and condemnation that's going to be directed in that general area is going to be very difficult for a lot of people to handle. And if you haven't experienced it already, if you've been on message boards that have not been sort of, pro-thought, pro-research, to some extent pro-conspiracy, you get pilloried. And I've watched it. I've seen people just, get their heads, multidimensional shape-shifting aliens told you that. A lot of the stuff that has come up with, like David Icke, and started to come back and circle back and be real fodder now for people that want to go on to an ad hominem attack on somebody who might actually have something to say. And and while Joe Rogan says, well, there's a lot of bullshit conspiracies out there, and they take away from the real conspiracies, he usually talks about these things in past tense. He doesn't talk about them in present tense. And there are secrets. There are pretty significant exhibitions of social engineering that have taken place. Here, let's just take one for instance. What was it? 7/11, which was, I believe, the bombing of the subway in England. And there was a guy who fought the English courts and the press. Let me just bring that up. Let me see if I can find this. See if I can find this. This is so interesting. 7/11 bombing. Okay, so it's the July 7th bombings. 2005. Let me see if I can find this. Court case decision. Getting closer. Just bear with me. It'll be worth it. It's interesting. When you look at this, there are a couple things that come up in the search. One is that 7-Eleven, the store, actually left the UK. And then apparently the bombers, theoretical bombers in 7-Eleven, on 7-Eleven, sued the UK and lost. But there was something about this. I'm going to find this. I'll talk about it when I get the 15 Minutes of Flame up and running. There was a guy who sued the government, and he won. I'm going to find this thing. And it showed that there was a case for conspiracy involved. I'm going to find this. Anyway, this is kind of the stuff that I was talking about with Rogan, and that there are pieces that are current. And even with stuff like Sandy Hook, which he now is so quickly dismissed. Should have Wolfgang Halbig on a show. I think that'd be really great. That'd be awesome. So we're at a time now where we're coming to the end of conspiracy theory, and it's actually a very critical time. Very, very critical time. You know, it depends on, you know, where we go. Well, it's like, what happens from here on out? Because the victors get to write the history books. That's nothing new. What happens if, for some chance or reason, all of a sudden, let's say, I'll give you an example. Let's say things are so hot and heavy going into the midterms, and Trump is so on the hot seat that somebody comes forward. Maybe it's military. Maybe somebody inside the military ranks. Somebody trusted. Maybe it's Mattis. Maybe Mattis reopens the vaults of 9/11 and says, we've got new information on 9/11. And then all of a sudden it comes out. And people like Dick Cheney and Don Rumsfeld and Bush and the Saudis and the neocons, and all of a sudden their feet are held to the fire. Wouldn't that be interesting? Wouldn't that be very, very interesting? And it would be an event like that that could be like a major pivot, and all of a sudden we're dealing with kind of a before and after moment. In as much as the media would do everything in their power to not let that happen. But let's just use that as an example. That could be a real game changer. And out of that comes, you know, a lot of other declassification and disclosure. And then as a result of that, there's like trials and, you know, there's stuff that happens. And it's big. And Catherine Austin Fitz was talking about this last night with the Sakers. I was listening to them. And there's a new level of transparency. Like you can like completely remake the government in some ways out of a moment like that. Dismantle, you know, certain groups inside the government, whether it's, you know, DHS or TS. I mean, it could be a seminal moment. The Gordian knot. Well, how do you think history would write the books on the backside of that? And that it would look like that this was the moment of a particular concrescence, where through the internet and people not wanting to be tied down or told what the truth is or told what reality is, were able to free their minds enough to be able to really examine the global agenda and more at a collective level, and that it was a game changer. Now all of a sudden we're having a different discussion about these times. If that doesn't happen, and we're kind of getting to that, zero-sum game. If that doesn't happen, and the other potential takes place, let's say what would be the worst case scenario? Trump is impeached. Disgrace, everything about nationalism, everything about making America great again, complete fail, disempowerment, laughing stock. The liberals just rout the midterms, and we have Bernie Sanders for president in 2020. How do you think the history books will look at this time? It'll look at this time as people were deluded. They were suffering from a collective psychosis. There was a cult-like atmosphere in the world. Things that were incredibly damaging and hateful, like conspiracy theories, were pervasive. And it wasn't until blah, 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 blah happened that sanity was restored. Right? This is what we're talking about. This is how the history books will rewrite what's going on, or write it moving forward. Why do cats puke on your carpet or my carpet? It's like, now I'm watching this with my cat right now. She was outside hanging out, and I've got a nice indoor-outdoor carpet. And she comes inside so she can, have a little puke on my living room carpet, and now she's going to let herself outside again. This is why people hate cats. This is why they hate them, because they do stupid shit like that. Dogs do stupid shit, but cats, come on. If a dog was going to get sick, do you think he'd run in and come puke on the carpet? No, dog would just get sick outside, because that's how dogs work. No, but a cat's got to come in and say, that carpet's really nice in there. And it's nice and soft, and, it's like my own little personal little kitty pad, because I really don't want to, foul up my nice outdoor space, because this is where I hang out. Why do cats do that shit? Anyway, just a thought. Thank you for listening in and being a part of today's wide-ranging Friday FARcast. I'm sure some of you might be offended by what I have said today. That's okay. I'm willing to take the heat. Some of you might agree with what I've had to say today. That's fine too. I don't attach myself too much to that either. It's best to kind of be in the middle and not take the praise too highly, and not take the slings and arrows too seriously either. I'll be back on Sunday night. Oh, by the way, if you want to hear my astrological forecasts, I'm doing those every morning. They're kind of fun. I'm getting them down to about 10 minutes a day now. I'm refining the process, and I do them over on getdialogue.am, and I put them up on Facebook and on Twitter. Okay, I'll be back on Sunday night with the Friday night live stream. And you know the drill. Use your head to discern what's real, your heart to stable when it's possible. Find me over at robertphoenix.com and on Facebook and on Twitter. Have a fantastic
We are living in a computer-programmed reality. We are living in a computer-programmed reality, and the only clue we have to it is when some variable is changed and some alteration in our reality occurs. We would have the overwhelming impression that we were reliving the present, déjà vu, perhaps in precisely the same way, hearing the same words, saying the same words. I submit that these impressions are valid and significant, and I will even say this: such an impression is a clue that at some past time point a variable was changed, reprogrammed as it were, and that because of this an alternative world branched off